Hi, Sachsenhausen, Kolonia Gwarna, Parna, Germania richtig dicker Heil, Sachsenhausen. Wirtycie jak bambusik, trupie łebki to kaktusy heil, es lebe kule der Kampf.
Welcome to Descendants Stuff, a podcast by and for the descendants of Sachsenhausen prisoners, working together to uncover the unanswered questions of its history. Sachsenhausen was a Nazi concentration camp located in Oranienburg, Germany, used from 1936 through April 1945. It was used as a labor camp, with a network of subcamps and worksites around the region, as well as a prison camp, death camp, medical experimentation center, and SS training ground. It was also the administrative center for all Nazi concentration camps. We are Jakob, Kelsey, and Nicole, three descendants of Sachsenhausen prisoners. Though our relatives were imprisoned for different reasons, we've discovered we have much in common. In each episode, we interview other descendants, researchers, and even survivors, sharing stories, memories, and research to build a clearer picture of the past, one that goes beyond the records. Through these conversations, we honor those who suffered and died at Sachsenhausen and strengthen our collective understanding of our own ancestors' experiences. Today's interview is with researcher, writer, and professor Carolina Ardila, who is conducting research on historical memory and memorialization at Sachsenhausen during our recent site visit. While not a descendant of Sachsenhausen, she does have an ancestral connection to Germany and the emigration by Jewish families in the 1930s. I sat down with Carolina to discuss her family history, her research on historical memory and memorialization, and how it connects to the memorialization work at Sachsenhausen. Welcome, Carolina. Thank you for joining us today and talking about your history and your work. We are here at Sachsenhausen. In our podcast, we mostly interview descendants of Sachsenhausen. You are not a descendant of Sachsenhausen.
No, I'm not.
But you are a descendant of who?
My family left Germany before the war officially started, or some of my family, because we still have cousins and brothers of my great-grandmother and great-grandfather that didn't survive. We don't know much about them. But my great-grandparents and my grandmother and her sister left in 1938. It's actually a very interesting story because my great-grandmother, her name was Ilse Caroline, she was, sometimes mocked because they were saying she was a witch or kind of a witch because she had something that she called an intuition. So when she had an intuition about something, she would read the tarot. And when Hitler became prominent in Germany, still not elected before that even, but when he started becoming like a known figure, she felt a premonition. She felt an instinct saying, oh, this person is kind of strange. So she did the tarot for him and she started pressuring everybody. We're going to have to leave. We're Jewish and he doesn't like us. So we need to leave and we need to find a new home. But of course, nobody believed her because she was, the witch of the family. And my great-grandfather told her, he was a cattle rancher. And he was like, there's no way I can take my cows with me anywhere. And those cows are the reason we have a livelihood and have, money to feed our kids. So there's no way we can leave. And she waited patiently. From time to time, she would tell them, hey, remember what I said? Things are getting ugly. You're starting to see the signs too. We need to leave. But they still didn't wanna live their whole life until, before everybody got on board, she decided she needed to make a plan. Because whenever people were ready, she had to be ready to lead them. So she was like the leader of the whole family in order to realize that they had to save their lives. She went to a public library and she looked for an atlas. And she kind of researched, where are the boats leaving towards where. So she started looking at the countries. She didn't know anything about South America. She had no idea. She could barely, pronounce the names of the countries. But she started looking. And when she found Colombia, the passage of this country that she never heard of, something stuck to her, which was a phrase that said, it's known to be the land of the good people. And after all these conversations about livelihood and money and, she said, that's all I need. I need good people. I don't need anything else. So she made her plans in silence and waited. And in 1938, one day, my great-grandfather was beaten in the street. He came bleeding. He came back home bleeding. And she was waiting for him in the door, like she had a premonition about it. And she told him, are you ready? Because your parents, my parents, and the children are living with me. Are you coming or are you staying? And of course, he said, no, okay, let's go. So they took the boat and they never came back. That's the story of how my family got to Colombia. My grandmother was 8 or 9 at the time. And she didn't talk much about it, but she always said the first day that she came, like the moment the boat arrived at Colombia, they arrived at the Pacific coast. Most of the people are Black descent. So she never seen a Black man or woman before. And that was very impactful for her. She was a little scared. She was a child. And she was like, where did we arrive? And my great-grandmother told her, it's okay. They're good people. And for me, it has always been very impactful because she was right. They arrived at the city, Buenaventura, at the beginning. They then moved a little bit inner in the country and arrived at Cali, where I live now. But when they arrived there, people did help them. There was a family that helped them and gave them jobs. And they built their house. At the beginning, they didn't have like floors or anything. It was just, earth, but they became very, established family with good living, and it was right. Her instinct was right. So that's how my family got to Colombia, which is very interesting because when we talk about memory, my historical memory is the memory of the war in Germany. And I own that. But at the same time, in Colombia, we also have an armed conflict. And I have lived through that also. So I own that also in my historical memory. I'm the owner of both. And that's a very big responsibility, actually, because you have to be able to work towards healing and towards peace. And how do you do it when you're the owner of both armed conflicts in your family line?
You're a descendant of the time, right? Your ancestors were here during the time that our ancestors were here, and you're descendant of that terrible situation. But then you grew up not here, you have that memory, and then you have your actual lived experience of growing up in armed conflict in Colombia. Can you talk more about that?
The armed conflict in Colombia is very difficult to explain to people outside of Colombia because it's an armed conflict that has been happening for more than 60 years. So it has changed and transformed, and new groups, armed groups, have started and ended, and we have maybe 10 different peace agreements throughout these 60 years that most of them have not worked. So it's really difficult to explain, but mostly it's related to the tenants of the land, who owns the land, and what can you do with the land. But also it has to do with political participation. Who can make decisions for the rest? Who can even participate in elections or in decision-making spaces? Because it's a very long-winded conflict, there are many, many, many victims of that conflict. Numbers are not exact because then you would have to ask, what is a victim? Is it only a direct victim, the person that violence happened to them directly, or a person who has known anyone, or even, some people? I believe everybody is a victim because you would never know what your life would be if you would have been living in a place without a war going on. So there's more than 10 million direct victims at the moment, more than 8 million displaced people internally. people that have had to leave their lands and find new places to live just because living in their own towns became too dangerous for them. So it's a country that everywhere in the country, doesn't matter where you are, you feel the conflict. In my personal life, I believe that I have always felt this responsibility to help in any way because they accepted us when we came. So in a way, the land of the good people, not everybody is good, but they were good to us. And in a way, I feel like you have to repay that kindness in a way. And how do you do it? Well, in any way you can.
Thanks for sharing some of your background. What brought you to Sachsenhausen? So you're not a descendant of Sachsenhausen, but you do have this background in your family emigrated from Germany. What brought you to Germany? What brought you back here? What are you doing here?
Okay, so at the moment I'm a lecturer in a university in Colombia, in Cali. It's called Universidad Santiago de Cali. And I'm also a researcher. So my PhD is in political science, but focused on how historical memory, specifically the education in historical memory, can transform political feelings. How can you feel differently about your political environment, but also your place in the political world after knowing and learning about a historical memory? So at the moment, I am researching how we can bring historical memory into the classroom, into the academic spaces. And that brought to me like a question, which is, okay, you can try and do something new, something different in Colombia, but we have these examples that have happened before in other places, and we have to be able to learn from them. And we have to be able to compare what helps us and what doesn't, or maybe which limitations have been encountered in other places that we can learn from so we don't repeat the same mistakes. So in thinking about that, I decided that, well, if there's somewhere that you're going to learn about how to teach memory and how to preserve memory, that's Germany. And Berlin specifically is a city that is surrounded by memory. Everywhere you go, everywhere you look, there's some kind of historical memory, even either Holocaust related or after the war, the Cold War, or whatever other moment or event was happening. But it's a city that has embraced the memory. And well, of course, Sachsenhausen is part of that memory because it's where most of the prisoners coming from Berlin ended up, at the beginning at least. So I made the request that I would like to come here and learn from them and interview a few people, and now I'm here.
And now you're here being interviewed. Yeah.
Also, yeah, amazing.
How long have you been here?
Oh, this is my second week.
Second week. And how long will you be here in total?
The whole month. I'm going to be
month.
here for 4 weeks.
Can you talk about, so far, what's impressioned on you, or what impressions do you have about the memory work of this memorial specifically?
I came here before. This is not the first time that I'm here. But the times that I came before, I came as a tourist, mostly. Well, it's kind of strange to say tourist in a place like this. I was visiting Berlin and I wanted to know, a little bit more about the history. So the first times I came, just trying to learn for my private interest, whatever I could. And this time I think it's a little bit different because I'm trying to learn what can be recreated or used in my own spaces. Particularly, I find it really interesting because when I was young, for me, the Second World War and concentration camps and everything, it was all about Jewish life. I went to a Jewish school, and the historical memory that was preserved by my community was about Jewish life and Jewish death. So for me, the victims of the National Socialists were Jewish. And after researching and coming to places like this, you realize there was so much more. And everybody that was a little bit different, that thought a little bit differently about something, who lived their lives in a way that was not approved by the movement, was also a potential prisoner. And I think that's really interesting because sometimes historical memory tend to be, closed and private, and this is my story, and this is what I want to know about it. And you start looking at the other as, you start feeling the suffering of other people. So I think something that it's been done here in a very intelligent way is the fact that they mention all these different kind of people, and they tell you they were here for different reasons, but they were all prisoners. And I think that's really important because it tells you that in order to be the victim of a totalitarian state or government, you don't have to be just one thing. You can be very different, many different things, and still be a potential victim. So there's a poem that I heard many years ago that said, when they came for the communists, I didn't do anything because I was not a communist. When they came for the homosexuals, I didn't do anything because I was not a homosexual. And when they came for me, there was no one else to help me. So I think a place like this teaches that, you don't have to just protect your own livelihood or your own private sphere, but you have to, keep your eyes open to what's going on with others.
That's something we talk about a lot ourselves because the different members of our group, our families were imprisoned for different reasons. I'm from a Jewish family, so my ancestor was imprisoned as part of the November pogrom, and I had the same experience as you. Growing up somewhere else, not in a Jewish school, but in the U.S., that the history of concentration camps was very saturated and focused on Jewish life and death, same as you. And of course, that's my family's experience as well, but I had the same experience as you in coming here and just learning so much about how widespread and how it was just so insidious in every aspect of life for everyone. Yeah. And actually, it relates back to what you were talking about Colombia and not being able to really define a number of victims, because who is defined as a victim? And the way you said it's everyone, because everyone's life is impacted by this armed conflict. Can you talk a little bit about what kinds of projects that you do, and especially work with the community and work with people who are impacted? How do you work to preserve and share their memories? What are your methods? What are the different kind of modes that you use?
Well, at the beginning, when you start working in historical memory, I think you believe that specifically me and my group of researchers, we started working about how we take that memory and put it in writing, preserve it in a way that you can learn from it and also other people can read it. So at the beginning we still do it, but that was our focus for a long time, just interviewing, doing all the chronological reconstruction, reading documents, whatever, and putting it together in books. So we have many books relating to different aspects of the Colombian conflict. And that was the main job that we had as a collective of researchers. As I said, my mom is a journalist. So that's what I got from her. She wrote books, so now I'm going to learn how to write books, and I'm going to do it with her. We still write together. This year we have a new book coming out. So we still do that. But then I started to get a little bit more interested in how do we teach that? Because in Colombia, the focus has been towards the victim. The victim needs the historical memory as a recognition of their suffering, as a recognition by the state and the society that this happened to them. And that's amazing. But the thing is, the victim already knows that what happened was bad. They don't need anyone to tell them that. But in Colombian society, there's a lot of I don't want to know, I don't want to hear, I don't want to talk about it. So how do you start transforming if you don't have these open conversations? So I started thinking, there's some generation that it's going to be already difficult to get them to accept that. But we have new generations that are interested in it, but we just don't have the resources, or we don't know exactly how to do it. So I started getting interested in how are we teaching memory? How are we getting to those learning spaces? Now I'm in a different moment of my research, which is I already went to the schools. I already researched how to do it. And then I realized something. Two things, actually. The first one is the teachers were telling me, everything you're telling them, it's amazing. It's really interesting. But the thing is, I'm a teacher. I work here 50 hours a week. I'm not going to go to the different locations and interview everyone and do all the research. I need to have the resources to do it. And there are a lot of resources, but not all of them work for every group. So, for example, we had this experience that we were working with a group, and one of the kids was blind. We were working with reading material, and the moment he said, okay, what do I do? We had to give him a different story because we had it in audio. But then he's not learning the same thing as the others. So there's an exclusion of his possibility to work with the group. So I started thinking, how do we do it in order for the same thing to be in different medias? So right now I'm working with transmedia tools. So for example, my students in one of our classes in university, we were talking about everybody's a victim. So we were talking about like how many of you could talk about your locations, your street, your town, and find a story of a historical memory story. And they were like, we all can. So, okay, that's what we're going to do. We're going to learn how to do it. So now I'm not the one writing the book by myself, but they're going back to their communities and they're doing the work. I'm teaching them how to do it. And it's interesting because we also realize that if I go, I may be like the doctor and whatever. I have all the academic background. But when I go to a community, they don't want to talk to me because they're scared, because they don't trust me, because the war is still going on. But when a member of your community comes and asks, you answer. So we managed to get 6 stories that are not written anywhere else. They created we made a book, and it's like a chronicle style book. But then we said, okay, let's make an audiobook. So we take the same stories and we put it in audio form. Then we said, okay, but this might be a language that is a little bit too complex for maybe younger audiences. So we make, from the same stories, we're now making short stories. And that short story, we're going to also make it in audio, but it's not going to be, just one person reading the audio like in an academic style, but we're going to have characters. So it's going to be more, flowy and interesting. We have an artist right now who's going to make a comic book about the same stories. So the idea is to get the same resources so nobody is excluded, but understanding that we all learn differently. And the slogan kind of our project is that the memory belongs to all of us. So we all have to be able to access it. So that's basically what we're doing right now.
That's so interesting. I do cultural work with a nonprofit organization in New Jersey, and we call it community history.
Yeah, it's very similar. We are local-based memory makers. Because in Colombia, there's a lot of talk about historical memory. There's laws and there are institutions and everything. But a big institution has limitations in resources and they always talk about the same very famous, very important cases that are, part of the story, the history of the Colombian people and are very interesting and whatever. But sometimes you want to teach about what's happening next to you, maybe 10 minutes away from your house, and you don't have those resources because those stories have never been written. So what we're doing now is actually trying to utilize these young people that are part of these communities that are learning how to become historical memory creators, and they're writing their own stories. Right now we have a group doing the second book because, we have more stories that we want to include, and amazing things have happened with that. For example, there was this young guy that is from a very difficult neighborhood, with a history of violence since the beginning of the 20th century. And he has lived there all his life. And he said, okay, I'm going to do it about my neighborhood. And while doing the research, he discovered an amazing amount of things about his own family because nobody has to have told them the stories. Because there are some things that you just don't talk about. Or his grandmother told him about a story of a family member that passed away. And he said, how is it that I never knew about this? And she said, you never asked. And then these kids are learning how to ask questions and how to write their own story, which is something that I would never be able to do because I don't even know what to ask or where to go ask. So it's amazing how we're using scientific methodology, but we're creating the history of the people that live in the spaces and that have never been asked about their lives.
What do you see for the future of that kind of work?
Well, the thing is, clearly we don't learn much about history, even with all this wanting to create historical memory. You see conflicts keep happening and violence keep happening. So I think we're always going to have the need to learn from our past. In the scientific community, there has been always a debate about if historical memory is an actual field of study because it has, and I put it, in quotes, an ideology. I always say that historical memory, it's not neutral. You don't do it just because you need to have the memory. You do it because you want to achieve something. And what do we want to achieve? We want to transform our spaces, our communities. We want to live in peace. So I think scientifically, the academia is slowly starting to accept that as a field of study, which makes it possible for more and more people to actually do the work and start, naming historical memory as a field and being able to get grants and get money in order to do all this work, because it takes a lot of money to be able to go to the different spaces and interview the people and then make a product out of it. So I think as an academic field, it's getting recognition, but I don't think it's, the academic work teaching the communities. I think the communities are teaching us that we need this. The communities already know that it's important to preserve the past. They've been doing it for centuries. Now we're making sure that we can preserve it in a medium that we can bring to other people and we can disseminate that into the whole society. But the historical memory is there. We just have to bring it out.
You made a point earlier that one of the differences in the work is here in Germany and Sachsenhausen specifically, where we are today, and Colombia, that the memory work here has happened. It's still happening, but it has happened. The event that we are exploring, it was in the past. In Colombia, it's ongoing. It hasn't ended. It's constantly shifting. That violence is still a reality in everyday life for many people. And the memorials here, though, are facing they're in a transition period because many survivors are gone.
Yeah.
Many of those who are left, they're aging and they will be gone in years. Over the course of a few more years, there really won't be many left. And there's things that are shifting in terms of starting to look at and work with descendants. How do you think work like yours could help to inform some of the memorial sites to kind of help that shift happen and continue the memory work here in Germany?
Well, firstly, I think the change is happening and we don't know yet where it's going because it hasn't happened yet. But the truth is, yes, for many, many years, our historical memory of the Holocaust and the Second World War has been based on testimonies of victims. Thank God that we have many of them recorded and we can keep them, But the reality is that when I was young, for example, we used to have victims come into the school and tell us their story. That's going to be gone soon. And we have to learn how to preserve that and show it in different ways in order to keep it interesting. And it's really sad to say that we have to, earn the interest of the population, because everybody should be interested in this. But that's the reality. When you go to younger generations that have maybe never met anyone who was a victim of the Holocaust, they don't connect with it the same way as we do. It's not the same to say, my grandmother, a person that I loved, had this difficult story happen to her, than to say, someone 200 years ago. So we have to find ways to keep it humane and emotive. Like, if you don't, I always say, because one of the things that people say about historical memory is that it's not only ideologically based, but also it plays with the feelings of the people. Like, when you do memory, you want people to feel them. Like, yeah, because if you're not feeling anything, you're doing it wrong, because something terrible happened to people. And if you're not feeling it, who's going to stop me from doing the same to others? I have to know that it's wrong. And a way to know that it's wrong is feeling it. So we have to preserve that, the feeling, the understanding that this happened to real human beings. Is not, it's not fiction. This happened to real human beings. And how do we make you feel that their lives mattered, even if you never knew them? It's a really big thing to do. It's difficult. In Colombia, we have other limitations. Our limitations go more towards the fact that sometimes it's dangerous to even speak about historical memory in some places. So how do you teach about something that you're not able to talk about? Or how do you reach these communities that are not reachable because of the armed conflict? So we have different limitations. But yeah, in Germany, I think the risk of it becoming the way we think about events that happened 300-400 years ago. So it's just a number and a date, and it's not people. That's a big risk, and memorials have to find a way to fight that. And I think you do it with emotion, with preserving the emotion of the testimony.
I will agree with that. I was feeling some emotion when you were telling your story of your ancestors, actually. It was very moving.
And I think that's the other thing. The other thing is, many of the people that went through this and lived through this thought that if you don't talk about it, it never happened. So there's a lot of descendants that doesn't know very much about it. And that's a problem, because when younger generations ask us, we're not going to know. And how do you preserve the memory of something that you don't really understand, or you don't know? Or you, like, for example, I never met my great-grandmother. I have her name, but I never met her. And I feel like I met her, and I love her because my mom preserved that memory. Because, as I said, she was her favorite person. So she talks about her all the time. But what's going to happen when nobody remembers her, and nobody can tell you about her quirks, and nobody can tell you about how she was funny, and nobody can tell you about things that only someone that actually met her know? And that's going to be difficult. I don't have an answer for that. How do we know someone that nobody living right now ever knew?
I think we do it by the work that you do, by the work that we do, the different kinds of media that we can use to collect and share stories. For sure. Yeah, you're doing very important work.
You too.
Thank you. Do you have anything else that you want to share with us?
I didn't know about this podcast before I met you, and I got the chance to start listening, and I got really emotional. I think you're doing something that it's not only important, but you're actually managing to do it right. And that's also proof that you don't have to have all the methodology and scientific expertise to do something that is done right. And it's very humane, and it's really easy to listen to. It's difficult because of the emotional part, but it's really easy to listen to because it's fresh and honest. And I think that's some of the things that we need to keep doing in order to do memory the right way. We need to keep it human. You need to keep it honest. and you just have to keep doing it.
Thank you so much again, Carolina,
you.
for talking with us today, with me, sharing your story.
This trip has been very important. Being in the podcast made me ask questions. So my family has been talking about these people that are not with us anymore, but we've been talking about them the whole week. I keep asking questions, and my cousins and my aunts and all the people are keeping their life, with us just by talking about them all the time. So we need to use their names and talk about them.
Descendants Stuff podcast is produced by Jakob Feistauer, Kelsey Snook, and Nicole Wines, 3 descendants of Sachsenhausen prisoners and co-creators of the Sachsenhausen Stuff project. The Descendants Stuff team would like to extend a special thank you to the team at Sachsenhausen Memorial and Museum, especially Dr. Astrid Lai and the members of the Educational Department's project, What Voice Do We Have?, as well as the Descendants Collective Voices of the Next Generation. The theme song, Heil Sachsenhausen, was written by Alexander Kulisiewicz while he was imprisoned at Sachsenhausen and performed by him after the war. It is used with permission from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's Kulisiewicz collection. If you are a Sachsenhausen descendant who would like to share your story, please contact us through our website at www.sachsenhausen-stuff.com or use the Contact Us link in the show notes below.
Heil Sachsenhausen. A jak będę jutro wzdychał lewą nóżką, ci zawtikam. Heil, es lebe Gold, o Kampf.